Hey everyone, and welcome back to the distance learning version of our course. Today we're starting Unit 5, which is loosely about language, but it's also just sort of a collection of topics that I think are interesting and worth you learning about, but that don't really fit into any of the other units. So today we're going to talk about bullshit. And bullshit, the sort of seminal work on bullshit is Harry Frankfurt's On Bullshit, which was both a paper and then it got expanded into a book that you can buy at Barnes & Noble, which is not common for contemporary philosophy. The book came out in the 80s, I think. And Harry Frankfurt is trying to give a conceptual analysis of bullshit. He wants to analyze our concept of bullshit that we all use and implicitly understand, but that we can't really or might not be able to articulate the rules for using right off the top of our heads. Because he thinks that we talk about bullshit a lot and that there is a lot of bullshit in the world that we can recognize. He says, and this is a quote, one of the most salient features of our culture is that there is so much bullshit. Everyone knows this. Each of us contributes his share. But we tend to take the situation for granted. Most people are rather confident of their ability to recognize bullshit and to avoid being taken in by it. So there's a lot of bullshit, and we all recognize it when we see it, and for the most part, we might agree on what is or isn't bullshit. But it's worth analyzing what actually that concept is. What does it mean for something to be bullshit? And that's what Frankfurt wants to do. He wants to analyze the concept of bullshit. What is bullshit? How is it different from other similar concepts? Because bullshit seems like it might be some form of falsehood or some form of deception, but it might be different than other forms like lying or just being mistaken. And Frankfurt, there's been some work on bullshit since Frankfurt, but most people I know of in the sort of philosophy world think he's basically right. There are some minor disagreements, but they think he's basically right. And so Frankfurt is ultimately going to say that bullshit is a form of deception, but that it's distinct from lying. It's different than lying or many other forms of deception. And he thinks that the bullshitter, the person producing the bullshit, is still trying to deceive their audience in a way. But that it's not in the same way as a liar. So it's worth looking at what lying is as a sort of comparison. So what is lying? Well, if you click the video link that you'll see in the lecture slides, there's a Seinfeld clip where George Costanza on Seinfeld says, "It's not a lie if you believe it." And that seems right. It's not a lie if you believe it. And that's part of what it means to lie. If you believe what you're saying and it's false, then you're not lying. You're just mistaken. You're making an error. You're passing on misinformation. But if you believe it, then you aren't lying. In order to lie, you have to know that what you're saying is false. If you don't know that what you're saying is false, then you're not lying. And the goal of a lie is to get the other person to believe your lie. If you'll remember when we talked about Kantianism, Immanuel Kant thinks that lying is forbidden because the claim that lying is okay leads to a contradiction. Because if lying's okay, then everyone will do it and no one will believe what anyone else is saying. And if no one believes what anyone else is saying, then lying becomes impossible. So if you say lying's okay, then lying's impossible. Contradiction, you can't lie. But the core fact about lying that Kant uses there is the fact that when you lie, you're trying to get the person you're lying to believe your lie. You want them to believe that what you're saying is true. That's the point of the lie. And so a liar knows they're lying. They know that what they're saying is false, and they're trying to cover up the truth. They know the truth, and they're trying to tell someone a falsehood in order to get the other person to believe that falsehood so that they do not know the truth. And so the liar wants their audience to believe the lie. And so if you're lying, then you know what the truth is, you know that what you're saying is false, and you want the other person to believe it. Those are all core features of lying. So, what's bullshit? How does that compare to lying? Well, Frankfurt looks at a lot of different potential analyses. It says maybe bullshit is just falsehood. Maybe if you say something false, that's bullshit automatically. But that doesn't seem quite right. Lots of falsehoods aren't bullshit. You can say something that's not true and it isn't necessarily bullshit. Historically, lots of scientific theories have turned out to be false because we got new evidence that suggested the old theories were wrong, and so we came up with the new theories. But those theories weren't bullshit. People sincerely believed them and worked hard on them. And so it's not bullshit, these theories that turned out to be false. So the fact that something's false doesn't automatically make it bullshit. Maybe bullshit's lying. That's another option that Frankfurt looks at. But that doesn't seem right either. Because lots of lies aren't bullshit, and lots of bullshit isn't lying. Rules can be bullshit, for example. There can be bullshit rules, and rules aren't even the kinds of things that are true or false. Administrative red tape, like you have to jump through a lot of hoops, as I'm sure you're all familiar with in the CUNY system. You know, you might have said at some point, having to change your password to get into CUNY first, or all the forms you have to submit for various basic things you want to do in the CUNY system. You might have said, well, this is bullshit. But that no one was lying to you when they said you have to do this, you have to fill out these forms. That's not bullshit. Or, I mean, that is bullshit, but it's not lying. It's not false. It's not a falsehood or a lie. These sorts of administrative red tapes and these rules that seem pointless, those are all bullshit. We can all recognize that some rules and some administrative hoops you have to jump through are bullshit, but they're not lies. So it's not the kind of thing that's false. And a lie has to be something that is known to be false. So maybe it's that something is sloppy or pretentious. That's another option that Frankfurt looks at. But he also rules it out because some bullshit is sloppy, but not all of it is. And some bullshit's pretentious, but not all of it is. You might think that those really fancy artisanal food stuffs that are for sale and are advertised places, you might think some of those are bullshit, but they're not sloppy. If anything, the reason they're bullshit is because people put too much care into it. It's so careful and so particular. And it seems like maybe it's careful and particular for the wrong reasons. So maybe that's why it's bullshit. But it's not sloppy. And not all bullshit is pretentious either, Frankfurt thinks. So what actually is bullshit? Well, there's an example that Frankfurt gives. And if you don't know who Pascal or Wittgenstein are, then don't worry about who they are. But Frankfurt quotes someone as saying, "I had my tonsils out and I was in the nursing home feeling sorry for myself. Wittgenstein called. I croaked, 'I feel just like a dog that's been run over.' And he was disgusted. You don't know what a dog that has been run over feels like." And so Wittgenstein gets mad at this person for saying that they feel like a dog that's been run over, when in fact they don't know what a dog that has been run over feels like. They've asserted something without knowing whether it's true or false. And Wittgenstein's mad about that. And Frankfurt thinks Wittgenstein takes Pascal's claim here that she feels like a dog that's been run over. That Wittgenstein takes that claim to be bullshit. And that, Frankfurt thinks, is the key to the concept of bullshit. That's the core of the bullshit concept. A liar knows what's true and is trying to cover up the truth. They say something that they know is false in the hopes that the other person, the person they're lying to, will believe the falsehood. But the bullshitter doesn't necessarily even know whether or not the thing they're saying is true. You can say something that is bullshit and have no idea whether it's true or false. And if it turns out to be true or turns out to be false, that's really a secondary concern. That doesn't affect whether or not what you said was bullshit. So the bullshitter, Frankfurt thinks, doesn't care if what they're saying is true. That isn't the point. That's not why they're speaking in the first place. They're not trying to cover up the truth, and they're not trying to get you even necessarily to believe what they're saying. For example, in the artisanal fancy foodstuffs, they present it as though it improves the food and that it's better than other food. But it might not be. And they might think it isn't either, and they might not expect you to think it is either. But they think that by putting all this effort into it and making it so artisanal and fancy and unique, then you'll buy it, or someone will. And that, whether or not it actually makes it better. And that's the bullshit. It's putting all this effort in, knowing that it won't make it better, or maybe not knowing whether or not it'll make it better. Putting in all the effort, not in order to make it better, but in order to make it fancy and artisanal for its own sake. That's bullshit. That's the essence of bullshit. It's doing something for the wrong reason. Specifically, doing something without caring about what it's normally for. So in the case of bullshit speech, where you say something and what you say is bullshit, Frankfurt thinks that bullshit is a statement made without regard to the truth. So the bullshitter is not trying to get you to believe their statement. They're trying to create an impression. Their goal is not to get you to believe the things they're saying. Their goal is to get you to believe something about them. And so the bullshitter is trying to hide their lack of commitment to the truth. The bullshitter doesn't really care whether the stuff they're saying is true or false, because that's not the point. The point is to create an impression about themselves, not to cover up the truth or to express the truth, to make true statements, which is what speech is normally for. When we talk, the point is to say true things and communicate information. If you're talking without regard to whether or not you're communicating true information, then you're bullshitting, according to Frankfurt's analysis. The bullshitter doesn't care whether or not you believe what they're saying. They want you to believe that they believe it. If you're bullshitting, if you're producing bullshit speech, then your goal is to create the impression that you believe what you're saying. And there might be different reasons for this. One example is flattery. A lot of flattery can be bullshit. And it's bullshit because when you're flattering someone, you don't necessarily believe that what you're saying is true. If you say, you're the funniest person I've ever met, I'm sure you don't have like a list in your head ranking everyone you've ever met in order from most funny to least funny. You might know that for sure that there is someone funnier than the person you're flattering, but maybe you don't know that for sure. But you say it anyway. You say, you're the funniest person I've ever met, yada, yada, yada. You flatter this person, and you don't necessarily think that what you're saying is true. Maybe you don't think it's false, but you don't necessarily think it's true. Because your goal in flattery is not to communicate facts about this person to them. You're not trying to tell them true facts about themselves. Your goal is to make them like you. Your goal is for them to like you. And so you're saying things without regard to whether or not they're true in order to get this person to like you. And you try to get them to like you by saying really nice and flattering things to them. And maybe they believe what you're saying, maybe they don't. But that's not the point. The point is to make them believe that you believe it. You want them to think that you hold them in this high regard. You want them to think that you really do think this. Now, maybe it's true, maybe it's false, but you want them to think you believe it, regardless of whether or not they believe it. So flattery is an example of bullshit because it's an example of speech where whether what you're saying is true or false is completely beside the point. You don't care whether it's true or false. Your goal is not to make them believe it. Your goal is not to communicate any information. You're just desperately trying to get this person to like you. And that's why flattery is bullshit. Bullshit can also happen, Frankfurt thinks, when you're forced to talk about something where you know nothing. You don't know anything about the topic, but you're forced to talk about it. So one example might be if you're at a party or some sort of family get-together and people start talking about a topic you know nothing about, but you feel pressure to contribute. Maybe you're trying to impress people at the party. Maybe it's your significant other's friends and you want them to like you, so you want to look knowledgeable. Maybe a kid has to give a book report and they didn't read the book. That's bullshit. In that situation, you're going to end up saying things. The kid giving the book report is going to end up saying things with no idea of whether or not they're true because they don't know anything about the book because they didn't read it. So they have no idea if what they're saying about the book is true or false. And so they're going to end up bullshitting because they have to talk just to fill the time. And their goal is not to communicate information about this book they haven't read. Their goal is just to do the assignment and pass the class. Or their goal is to make it look like they put some work in when in fact they didn't. That's bullshit. It's a form of deception because it's trying to create a false impression about yourself. Basically, the impression that you know more than you actually do. But whether the individual statements are true or false isn't the point. You don't care whether or not anyone believes the individual statements you make. You care what they believe about you as a person, whether or not the things you're saying are true. And so that's a form of bullshit. So the only concern when bullshitting is to create some sort of impression. It's not to communicate true information, and it's not to hide the truth, at least not the truth about what you're saying. So bullshit can happen when you're trying to impress people. I mentioned at the party, if you're bragging a lot, bragging can be bullshit. Bragging can definitely be bullshit. Because bragging is like flattery. You might try to impress people by making a lot of self-aggrandizing statements, by bragging hyperbolically. And you do that in order to impress people, in order to make people think that you're great. Make them think that either that those things about you were true or that at least you believe them and so look confident and seem more confident than you are. In those cases, the bragger will become the bullshitter. They're just trying to impress people and create this impression about themselves. And so the desire to look like you know what you're talking about is going to be responsible for a lot of bullshit, Frankfurt thinks. And the desire to impress people is going to be responsible for a lot of bullshit. When he says, bullshit is unavoidable whenever circumstances require someone to talk without knowing what he's talking about. Thus, the production of bullshit is stimulated whenever a person's obligations or opportunities to speak about some topic are more excessive than his knowledge of the facts that are relevant to that topic. Meaning, if you are ever called upon to talk about something where you don't know that much about, you're gonna be forced to bullshit in that situation. There's no way around it. And so bullshit can happen in lots of different circumstances. and in lots of different cases. But the essence of bullshit, Frankfurt thinks, is indifference to how things really are, an indifference to what is or isn't true. When you're speaking, either to impress people or to get them to like you or to give the impression that you know more than you do, you're going to end up making statements without any regard to whether or not they're true. You might know they're true, you might know they're false, but the fact that they're true or false isn't the point. And you might have no idea whether they're true or false. So bullshit is indifference to how things really are. It's a form of speech where you are talking not to communicate information, which is the point of talking, usually. You're talking to create an impression, to impress people, look like you know what you're talking about, get someone to like you, etc. And so you make statements with no regards to whether or not they're true. And that's bullshit, according to Frankfurt. All right, so that covers the material for today. If you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, stay safe out there.